Our next presentation then will be Sonia Alconini, who will also be seconded by Dr. Walter Alvarez after she's done with her presentation. We're taking the road to Collasuyo, to Bolivia at this point, from Cusco. Dr. Alconini will speak on the Inca roads in the south central Bolivian Andes, frontier expansion and political organization. Sonia Alconini is an associate professor in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Her research has concentrated on the southern Andes, where she studies the Inca imperial frontiers by using archaeological and ethnohistoric information. Dr. Alconini.
Hi. I'm going to try to be brief since we don't have much time. I'm going to be talking on the Inca roads of the South Central Andes in my area. I was born here, so let me just start with a presentation on the Inca roads. You guys saw this presentation, this slide. You can see that the Inca road was really extensive. It covered most of the Andes, 40,000 square kilometers. You can see there two main roads. One went from the eastern section, and the other one went over to the western part, and then you see these lateral roads. And we saw several pictures. It's very clear that the east-west segments were also very important because they linked different areas, the Pacific coast, the valleys, the highlands, and then you go all the way to the Quechua area. And if you see here, we discussed the importance of the Colcas, of the Chasquis, of these imperial armies. They going crossing the roads, the Coyaquin, and so on. Okay, so and the Sapa Inca as well. You know, I don't want to forget him, but yeah. So what we have here is this map of Hislop. I'm sure that some of you guys are familiar with this. I'm just going to show here the two main roads, north-south. As it was explained here, the Inca road was used, the royal road for the army, for those lamas, bureaucrats. There were all kinds of tampos there, the storage facilities, with all kinds of things. They were filled with sandals, food, textiles, and so on. So it was very easy for the imperial army to move from one place to the other. Imagine how fast these military troops had to move. And if they had all of these facilities at hand, they didn't have to carry anything. So really, speed was quite important in here, and as Daltroy has explained, it was sort of like a staple-based economy, which means that the Incas didn't sponsor decentralized markets. There wasn't a coin-based system, meaning that all of the provinces had to be supplied directly from the region. Okay, so it was a staple-based economy. We don't have this finance-based economy based on coins. So the strategy was different, and in this context, clearly the road played a quite important part. Now, in this map, if you see, I'm showing basically some of the I'm showing here some of the fortifications. You can see I'm trying to mark this. There are two main areas here. Pambamarca in Quito was quite important. You find there different military centers in here close by the frontier. But you also see something similar in this section of the frontier. If you see, we have all kinds of frontier centers here, the fortifications. And if you see here, based on Daltrey as well, you find all kinds of storage facilities, state farmlands, and you see, in my view, you have this pattern, because in the north, what you have is that most of these storage staple-based systems are basically placed next to the road, okay? But if you see, if you go farther south, the pattern will be different. Most of these red dots, if you see here, are closer to the frontier. So for me, that means something. Okay, so this is just a quick image showing you all of the detail and the level of sophistication of these roads, paved roads, all kinds of stairways. You also find other supplementary, facilities there I explained. Now, if we start thinking about the function of the roads, in my view, we have three types of roads. You have those state roads, the royal road, which was, as we know, basically used for the state, for the military army, for the administrators, for the chasquis. So all of these activities were quite controlled by the state. Okay, and this road is the one that linked the capital with all of the provincial centers. Now, at the lower level, we also find these provincial centers, which were, different in nature. The investment was less marked because it wasn't full-time in the hands of the state. All of these, the provincial centers, what they did is basically to link the provinces with the local communities. Okay, and at a lower level, what you're going to find are those local paths, not formal, just, small paths with dirt. And what they did, it's basically to communicate these different communities. So you have sort of like a three-tier road-based system. The functions were different. So what I'm going to do in this case is to focus on 3 case studies just to be able to understand and see what is the nature of the Inca frontier roads. Okay, what is the function of these roads in relation with the settlement patterns? Because after all, roads link people. So we don't have to forget that part. So I'm going to emphasize what is the nature of these roads in relation to the local people, local communities who were living there, and what kinds of interactions they had with these roads. And what I also want to understand is the kinds of support facilities that we see in these roads, and you will see that the functions are different. My main focus, by the way, is going to be the frontier. What I do is study the Inca imperial frontier. So in this case, what I want to understand is the function of these roads in the frontier. Okay, and that's why I showed you in the first part this association in the central area and southern area, especially of these roads, the fortifications, and these storage areas. So what I'm going to do is to focus on 3 study regions just to see how they vary in nature and scale. So at this point, what you have here is the southeastern Inca frontier. We are in Bolivia. If you are familiar with the region, we have Samaipata, a very quite important center of the frontier. They had to deal with the Chiriguanos, with the Guaranis. And then we have in Callacta, which is in Cochabamba, one of the 7 Cuscos. And then if you see in this other area, we have a set of fortifications. All of these are very close to the frontier. And in this region, in this area, the political Inca frontier matched this natural frontier, if you see. We have here the cold highlands, and in this area, you start to see the tropical Piedmont. In some areas, this is known as the Yunga, Okay, and the yunga was quite important for the empire because the yunga had coca leaves, which you guys know that was absolutely important for the Inca Empire. And also these regions are quite rich in gold. Okay, so of course, the Incas wanted to expand into this region. All kinds of resources were there. But the question is why they couldn't, why they stopped right here, okay, and why you find the frontier in this area, and what is the nature of these settlements right in here next to the frontier. So I'm going to be talking about Oroncota, which is right here within the frontier, and then I'm going to talk about the Cuscotuyo, which is right at the margins of the frontier. Oroncota, if you see here, this is a quite beautiful valley, okay, a lush, fertile valley floor. This is the Pilcomayo River. You have here the Pucara Plateau. It has this a triangular shape, quite high, more than 1,000 meters of altitude, and it's completely vertical, if you can see here. So I did a survey in this area with my team, of course, not by myself. But what we found is all kinds of sites. And let me tell you this, surveying this area, surveying this segment, trying to find sites is not hard. It's flat. But climbing this to be able to find the kinds of settlements here was absolutely hard. We had to climb here for more than one day. We had to camp right in the middle of these, cracks. It was just awful. But once you are there, I stayed there for 1 month. I didn't want to go down until I would finish, surveying the area. It was just, crazy. They would bring us food there, live chicken, things like that. Well, I don't want to go into details, but it was quite challenging. The area is beautiful, though. And as you see here, I'm just going to show you very quickly the settlement changes over time. Okay, we have the early Yampara period, very few sites. Most of them are on the valley floor. There is a reason, quite rich area, especially for corn. This one, okay. In the following classic period, you start to see a change. And the most important one is that you see an increase in the number of sites, but most of the sites are in the Pucara Plateau. And you start to see that there are 2 settlement clusters. Those may be some sort of political, groups. People don't settle randomly. If you want to live close by to a neighbor, it's because, you have similar, ties, maybe it's family, similar ethnic groups, language, and so on. So you start to see here 2 groupings, okay? The number of sites in the valley floor grows, but, remains about the same. So all of these settlement changes in favor of the plateau, which in fact, it's a quite difficult area to have access to, happened before the Incas, okay? And second, this area is not, is dry, okay? Water resources here are quite limited, in fact. In the following period, you start to see many more sites, almost twice, and most of them are on the Pucara, okay? Tiny sites, though. So the settlement, so when the Incas came, adapted to existing settlement preferences. What is also interesting is that they started to build these 3 main centers, Inca facilities, 1, 2, 3, and this is one of them. This is the Oroncota Center. It's also known by the locals as Incarri, and you guys are, if you're familiar with this, you will see that this is a beautiful center, beautiful architecture. Incarri was, an Inca hero. Okay, then you find the second site, El Pedregal, which is a military fortification. They try to protect the plateau. The third site in this area is Incarri Moco, okay, another important center. So what I wanted to explore here is the association between these Inca sites and sites with rock art in regard to the transportation route. Okay, and I'm going to be really fast in here. What I did is this GIS-based analysis. I wanted to see the relationship between this path, the Inca centers, and these sites with rock art. I did this optimal analysis path, and just to summarize, what I found is that these are the those stars are the Inca centers. It's not this is not working, but the path goes all the way, linking these three main sites with rock art. Okay, this is one of them. A hidden cave. It must have been a shrine. All along the road, you have the road in here. If you see here, you have the sun and the moon. There was ritual offerings next to it, but quite hidden. It's a hidden shrine next to the road. Then you find in the upper part this other center. This is a painted wall next to the third Inca center. So it's marking access to the Inca road, or to the Inca center. Okay, so it's a marking, a landmark to be able to visualize this center. The third one is right in here. It's a small outcrop, and as you can see, well, you don't see, clearly here, but it has these circles. It marks access to the plateau. Quite important, because really, if you don't know where you are going, you can get lost very easily. So, for this section, yes, you find an association between these, sacred outcrops, the shrines. The Inca centers fulfill different functions in the settlement. The Pucara was not just a natural fortification, as described in some accounts. It was also an important regional waka, and you can tell that by the name. So all of these sites with rock art, marked, these important points in the landscape. When the Incas came, they appropriated those important sacred landmarks. So let me just go very quickly to the second center, Cuscotuyo, which is a fortification. This area is reported in the historical accounts as one important fortification that was invaded by the Guarani Chiriguanos, which was a tropical a tribe that really, they started invading the frontier systematically. Why? Because they thought that the Incas had the Candire. Okay, the Candire is the mythical land without evil. Okay, it's sort of like a paradise where any Guarani could find food, riches, all of those things. And of course, who had those were the Incas. So that's why they started to invade all of these Inca centers. And it was destroyed multiple times, rebuilt by different rulers. This is a quick view of the center. You can see here, the most important aspects here is that there are very few settlements. Okay, the area is not easy to inhabit. You have this lush canopy forest. For them, it's Monte Alto, which is, which signifies dark forest. It's not an easy area to live. That's why we see very few settlements. What is interesting, though, is that you find this fortification. You have an extensive wall. When it was invaded and repaired, most of these walls were blocked. So from being, a frontier center, it became, at the end of the sequence, it was more militarized. Some view of this long wall. You can see that it was a defensive wall. Outposts in different areas and piles of bola weapons. It's very clear that it was defensive in nature. This is not the only military site in the region. There are many more, and if you see the distance, they are very close to each other. Not as close as those Inca defensive sites like in Ecuador. Pambamarca, those fortifications are much closer, in space. But still, the average, the mean distance, for these sites is 22, kilometers, which may have been the minimum in this region to be able to defend this area. Now, what is interesting is that all of them are very, very close to the Inca Road. The Inca Road, in this case, is not formal, okay? It doesn't have, these paved areas. It's an informal road, and you can tell what is the function of these roads. It's to link these fortifications because local people are not there. So it's not to link people. It's to, facilitate defense. Okay, so let me just move, since I have, very few time. The third site that center area that I wanted to talk about is the eastern, the Callahualla region. Walter will be expanding on this. This is the famous Inca Road, Urcosuyo, Umasuyo, and you can see that some entered into the Callahualla region, and then they go all the way to the tropics. Some of them go into here. Lots of gold in this area. So talking about gold and silver, this is the area that had the most. It was quite important, starting with Tiwanaku. Okay, even for Tiwanaku, this was a quite critical area. You find here a picture which is going to show you the variation. In a very short distance, you can see different environments. In the upper part, you have the cold puna. Going low, you have the Quechua flanks. And if you see here, it's full of terraces, okay? You find valleys over valleys over valleys with terraces. Clearly, it was a quite important region for the Inca Empire. At the lower section, you have this narrow valley bottom, and in the eastern section, you have the tropical Piedmont, the Yunga. This is where they grow coca. So about the importance of the Callahualla, Walter, so he may be able to explain in more detail who are the Callahuallas. This is just a quick picture showing you the importance that they had since antiquity. They are known as these traveling shamans, herbal, healers, and so on. In 1900, they were invited by the president of Panama to be able to cure malaria in that area. You can see them here, the Callahuallas, as the royal litter bearers for the king and the Coya queen. That was, an honor. In some accounts, they are described as the doctors of the royal court of the Inca. So you can, assess that, they were quite important. We did an extensive survey in here. You can see the area was quite large. We found more than 2,000 sites in the survey. Okay, we have a long sequence, okay? Just to summarize, the formative period, very few sites. You see some incipient trading routes. These sites are ceremonial sites that are linked somehow with the Yayamama religious tradition of the Titicaca Basin. This was an important religion shared by different polities. You see all kinds of temples that facilitated social exchange, interaction, and so on. And the Callahuallas, or the Yungas at this time, were certainly part of this. Tiwanaku era, you see the same, all kinds of sites, but what is relevant here is that the exchange nodes starting to become more and more important. How do we see that? You see these stars, those are funerary caves. You can see that they are all very close to the, to the incipient road. So there is an association between exchange, trade, ritual practices, and the Yunga area, okay? Some examples of these ceremonial centers, Wata Wata, we found here It was a cemetery. We also find human sacrifice at the transition between the formative and Tiwanaku. The Tiwanaku entered this area, and you see some form of ritualized violence. Here we found an offering of, three individuals, two females, cranial head decapitation. You see some marks in here, scalping, scraping, eye extraction, mandible extraction, you name it. I can talk later about the significance of, why to extract the eyes, but I don't have time. But this is another example of a funerary cave, Niño Corín, close by to another center, so you can tell what Tiwanaku is doing there. They are traveling, going into the Yungas, and you find these funerary, implements, the rapé, snuff, complex, quite popular in Chile, for example. Late intermediate period, radical changes, more defensive citadels. There is a process of regionalization, okay? The exchange networks are shrinking and changing in nature. By the Inca period, these are just some examples of those defensive citadels. By the Inca period, lots of changes. The terraces are built in an extensive fashion. You have here some pictures. What you also find is these storage facilities. They are known locally as puyos, and it's quite important because if you read the accounts, it says tons of agrarian workers were sent by the empire into this region to grow these, areas, and the evidence is there. These are the storage, units that were also used as temporary residences for these agrarian workers. They are not clustered. They live next to the terraces, next where they are working. Now, this is just a quick picture showing you the distribution of these storage facilities in these agrarian farms, more than 900 warehouses, lots of storage capacity. So, and here is the frontier. So clearly it's showing you, what's the importance of this region for the expansion of the frontier and the empire. These are some just Inca centers. I will just show you very quickly the Acamani Sacred Mountain. Walter, spoke yesterday about this. Some Inca centers, significant access to fine Inca pottery. This was an elite Inca center. The other center is at the other end, almost entering the tropical montaña. This is a tambo. You have a Callanquin here, great for growing coca. And even beyond, if you see here, the famous gold mines of Mapiri are here. So you can see why, they were seeking to penetrate farther and farther into the eastern, the tropical region. Some of these red dots are Inca fortifications, so they are increasingly trying to protect and to monopolize, these, exchange routes. With Tiwanaku, it was more about religion, fluidity of exchange, relations. Here, you see a radical change. Now, some quick details about the road, all kinds of things excavated into the rock, platforms, stairways, canals, bridges, you name it. Even segments that are, look more rituals. To finalize, what can we tell about these three examples? That the frontiers have, of course, roads, different types of roads. They are fulfilling different functions. Some of them are quite ritual. They are appropriating, the Incas are appropriating this sacred landscape. In other cases, such as the Cayaguaya region, they want to control and formalize these quite rich areas. They invest a lot in the road, in the agriculture, in the storage facilities. If the area is quite conflictive, such as in Cuscotuyo, no people, the roads are more informal, and they basically serve to link these defensive facilities. So even though all of those are roads on the frontier, the functions are completely different. Okay, so in the future, I would like to explore other things that it's not worth explaining now. I just want to say at this point, thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Nice presentation.